Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started introducing. So, hi everyone, welcome to the first webinar in our Learning and Advocacy series on data centers. My name is Prasidi Thapalia. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a National Organizing Fellow at We Act for Environmental Justice. And so the purpose of these webinars is to shed light on some community impacts from data centers beyond some of the more well-known environmental impacts like water consumption and fossil fuel infrastructure. And so this series is hosted as part of the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum, which, as many of you may know, is a coalition hosted by We Act, 42 grassroots EJ organizations in 24 states and DC. Many of our members are actively engaged in data center site fights from North Carolina to Massachusetts to Tennessee and beyond. And so we hope that you leave with some more knowledge and skills that you can take away to advocate for regulation and protection in your own communities. And so before we begin, I'd like to ask that if anyone has questions throughout the webinar to please use the Q&A function. And so that way our speakers can answer those at the end of the presentations during the Q&A session. So today's session is going to focus on transparency issues. First, we'll be hearing from Amanda Garcia from Southern Environmental Law Center on where these concerns come up in both data center siting and impact reports. Afterwards, Marquita Bradshaw from Sowing Justice will provide a community perspective from Memphis, Tennessee. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Amanda. Amanda Garcia is a senior attorney in the Tennessee office and the data center project leader at the Southern Environmental Law Center. Amanda guides SELC's work addressing the impacts of data centers across the region and works directly alongside communities to help build a more resilient, just, and livable future in the South. Amanda's legal practice centers on energy, air, and environmental justice. She led the SCLC team that helped the Southwest Memphis community defeat the crude oil pipeline and co-led the SCLC team that supported a community opposition to XAI's Colossus One data center in Southwest Memphis. Amanda regularly collaborates with a dedicated coalition of local community leaders to create more environmental justice in predominantly Black communities in Memphis. Amanda, it's really great to have you here. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Prasidi, and thank you to We Act for Environmental Justice for hosting this webinar and inviting me to participate alongside Marquita Bradshaw, who is a fellow advocate on the ground in Memphis. And I've been really grateful to work with Marquita in her other role as NAACP EJ chair on the XAI facility in Memphis. And I think I also see the local NAACP president from Memphis on this call. So thank you both for everything that you've been doing to fight against Elon Musk's XAI data center on the ground in Memphis and in the Memphis metro area. As Prasidi said, my name is Amanda Garcia. I'm a senior attorney and the data center project leader for the Southern Environmental Law Center. I got my introduction to data center advocacy through my environmental justice work in Memphis when XAI announced the Colossus One data center back in June of 2024. So we have been working to address the impacts of that data center for the past couple of years. I know Marquita is going to talk more about the lack of transparency and how the community experienced it on the ground. I'm going to share some of the takeaways I have from that work, as well as the work that SELC has been doing around the region on data centers over the past few years. My background includes energy, air, and environmental justice work in Tennessee and across the region. So I'm going to pause and share my screen here really quick. I'm going to talk about information is power, advocating for data center transparency. So, well, it was forwarding and now it's not. There we go. as it is throughout much of the country, data center development is booming in the South. For folks who may not be familiar with the Southern Environmental Law Center, we really focus our efforts on 6 states in the Southeast: Virginia, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. We also have an office in DC, which is actually where I'm located today, that where we do federal affairs work that is focused on addressing, issues of concern in the South. But as you can see from this map, data centers are just um, have become a huge issue throughout our region. Obviously, I don't know if there are folks on the call from Virginia, but Virginia is kind of the epicenter of the data center boom, close to 700 existing and proposed data centers in Virginia alone. Georgia has been another place where there is just a huge data center development boom going on. And so we are working with communities on the ground to address impacts of data centers all across our region, as well as advocating at the state and federal level for policy solutions that will help make sure that we have guardrails in place to protect shared resources for communities as data centers continue to be developed in our region. I'm sure I don't need to tell folks on this call that the stakes for communities in the data center development boom are incredibly high. This is an image of data of combustion turbines, methane gas combustion turbines operating at the Colossus One data center in Memphis. You can see the heat coming off of the turbines here. These turbines were originally installed with no permit and no pollution controls in Memphis, which is a community that already hosts especially in Southwest Memphis, where this is located, already hosts a staggering number of industrial facilities and has it's been identified as an air toxics hotspot. So there's a significantly higher cancer risk, 4 times the national average in Southwest Memphis. And then there is an existing smog problem in Memphis where the whole area is not meeting minimum federal smog standards, and smog contributes to respiratory illnesses and makes them worse. So asthma, COPD, things like that. So this is a real public health concern from the operation of these combustion turbines that are used solely to power the XAI data center and now data centers in Memphis. So air pollution is a concern, especially for facilities that use what I call pop-up power plants, like the XAI power plant, where they're running fossil fuel power plants 24/7 to operate data centers. And we are seeing an increasing number of those in our communities across the South. But also the generators that are for emergency, ostensibly for emergency purposes, are usually diesel generators. So they're pretty dirty in terms of their emissions of particulate matter, which is another really harmful air pollutant. And especially in areas of high concentrations of data centers, like some of the counties in Virginia, there's a lot of concern about potentially high levels of acute exposure to air pollutants during periods of time where those emergency generators are being turned on and operated. Noise pollution is another issue that we hear a lot about. Particularly, folks may have seen the community that lives very close to the South Haven gas plant in northern Mississippi, which powers another one of the XAI data centers, have had to live with incessant noise. And that is one of the big features of data center noise, is that these things operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so even if the noise is within, whatever your local or noise ordinance might say, those limits are really not contemplating 24-hour a day incessant noise. And so that's another concern communities have. Air or water use, the amount of water that's being used, as well as concerns about water pollution impacts or wetlands impacts associated with the development of data centers in the first place. And then, of course, the impact on our electricity bills from all of the additional capacity that is needed to power the number of data centers that we're building across the country and across the region. So we're really seeing a lot of investment in expensive and dirty methane gas power plants and pipelines to fuel them. And our utilities are building as much as they possibly can and passing those costs along primarily to not just the data center companies, but also you and me. And so there's a lot of conversation going on around how to make sure that data centers are paying their own way so that we're not footing the bill for all of the power generation that is being built. So unfortunately, with all these impacts, you would think that it's extremely important for communities to have a seat at the table, to make sure that they can participate in the conversation and help determine whether and on what terms a data center is going to be invited into the community. But instead, what we are seeing pretty consistently is that these deals get done behind closed doors as much as they possibly can. And one of the primary ways that that happens is through the use of non-disclosure agreements between the data center developer and local officials. Those can be everyone from your local police department to the local utility, your city council members, your economic development board. A lot of in Memphis, there were a lot of agreements to keep the deal quiet. The legislature or the local city council actually was not privy to the arrangement in Memphis, but we have in other places in the Southeast, including most recently, just yesterday, it became public that we obtained the non-disclosure agreement that members of the city council of the city of Bessemer in Alabama had signed a non-disclosure agreement with the Project Marvel data center developer there. And so these non-disclosure agreements give the developer a way to control the flow of information to the community and to prevent information about the potential downsides of having a data center, from becoming public before the deal gets signed. And this is important both because the community might have ideas about ways to address some of those impacts, but also because those impacts and other community benefits could be part of something like a community benefits agreement if the community has the seat at the table to talk with their local elected officials and the data center developer on the front end. So what can you do to get access to information about a potential data center project that might be coming into your community? I am here to tell you that the first and best line of defense is a good offense. And the primary offense that we have on data centers right now is making sure that your local land use regime is set up to allow for community input and engagement on the front end of a data center moving in. So one important role that this plays is making sure the community has notice of a data center proposal on the front end, and so that they can start asking questions. So SELC has actually developed a whole guide for communities that have zoning to make sure that your zoning ordinance is set up to eliminate what we call by right zoning for data centers. So what happened in Memphis was that the data center moved into an existing industrial building and didn't have to get any sort of zoning approval. If we had in place in our zoning ordinance a special use permitting requirement for data centers, then they would have had to come before the land use control board and probably the city council before getting up and running. And so making sure that your local ordinance has some sort of specific mechanism in place for dealing with data center development. In our guide, we definitely talk about making sure there's a special use permitting process in place, or some communities are going further and just developing a whole suite of requirements at the local level for data centers. Sometimes including things like banning on-site power generation if it's going to be used 24/7. Right now, we're in Nashville, Tennessee, where I live. We're considering a data center ordinance that has pretty comprehensive requirements, and also for larger data centers does require a special use permit as well, because as folks on this call know, every site is different and the concerns of the community around that site are going to be different. And so having something like a special use permit in place allows you to put site-specific conditions on the property or on the development through that process. So I can't say enough like how important it is, even if there's no data center proposal on your radar in your community currently, you can get out in front of it and make sure that you've got zoning protections in place. This is, again, assuming you live in a place that has zoning. Not all. I recognize there are a lot of rural communities that don't have zoning in place. We're seeing a lot of those communities adopt moratoria using other mechanisms. But I do really highly recommend taking a look at our land use guide and just getting out in front of any potential data center developments that might be coming your way. It doesn't solve the NDA problem. NDAs are non-disclosure agreements are a pretty standard part of economic development projects in general and have been for a long time. The thing that is making them so frustrating and potentially stretched, well, very much stretched beyond the intended purpose of them in the data center context, is that the scale and speed of these proposals is so much greater than what we've seen for most industrial and commercial development in the past. So because of the scale of the impacts on shared community resources, it's really important that communities have this information in front of them on the front end, but our economic development frameworks that allow for the use of NDAs are just not set up to deal with the scale of these issues. So that even if there is an NDA in place, and whether you have the right zoning in place or not, the other thing that's really important on the front end, as soon as you learn about a project, is just to start asking questions about the impacts as soon as you can, as often as you can, and as insistently as you can of your public elected officials and appointed officials. This is something that we did in Memphis, and it's the primary way that we helped to shift the narrative from a focus on the economic development to the potential community impacts. And it can actually have a really strong effect on transparency, because at least the NDAs that I've seen, the non-disclosure agreements that I've seen, usually do have a provision that allow the officials who have signed them to disclose information as long as they have permission from the data center developer. And so if you are building political power, or if you're building people power and pressure and asking the questions, it's going to be more likely that the local officials will go to the developer and ask for permission to disclose more information to the community, hopefully on the front end of a project, but even after the fact, it can be really important and helpful in helping the community understand the full scale of the potential impacts. So I strongly recommend that as definitely we experienced it as the quickest way to get information, because the next one I'm going to talk about is submitting public records requests. Folks are probably familiar with the Freedom of Information Act. That's the federal law that allows you to get information from federal government agencies. Most states also have open records acts or public records acts. So you can also make requests to state and local agencies. We have done all of those. We've used all of those tools to get information from a pretty broad range of different agencies, including the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, the State Environmental Agency, the local Economic Development Board, the local utility, the local air pollution agency. So you can submit those public records requests. Depending on the way that the different agencies operate, it can take a longer time than you want it to sometimes to get answers, which is why I'm suggesting asking the questions informally I think it's a both and. Like, you want to do both. You want to get the actual documents and the public records requests out the door, but asking the questions publicly is really important. And finally, you can also monitor different data viewers. If your state or local environmental agency has like a permitting data viewer, usually local zoning boards they'll post permit applications. We've used the registers of deeds websites a lot to look at like property transactions that are going on. So you sometimes have to get creative about where you're looking for the information, but it's out there. I actually didn't put this up there, but another place to look is if you know who the developer is, the company is, you can look at their SEC filings. You don't always know who it is, so that can be harder to a harder nut to crack. But if you do know who it is, there will sometime, and it's a publicly traded company, there will be SEC filings that may talk about their future plans in addition to what they have going on currently. So I am going to really quickly show you, this is our land use guide that I mentioned. I've got the link in here. Happy to share this slide presentation. And then I am going to turn it over, I guess, back to Prasidi to introduce Marquita.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was super great. I really appreciate you mentioning how groups can leverage already existing zoning codes and regulations in order to get the information that they need. It's kind of something that we've talked about internally, but I think that that guide will provide a lot more direct action for what folks can do to protect their communities. So thank you. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Marquita Bradshaw, who is a native of South Memphis, a lifelong environmental justice advocate, and the founder and executive director of Sowing Justice, also a member of the EJLF. She began her activism near a military Superfund site in her childhood neighborhood, co-founding Youth Terminating Pollution. A working-class single mother, she earned her degree from the University of Memphis and has since led community-centered campaigns across Tennessee. In 2020, she made history as the first African-American woman and first woman of the Tennessee Democratic Party to win a U.S. Senate nomination. She also serves on the Tennessee Valley Authority Regional Resource Council and has received the Sierra Club's Environmental Justice Award and the Harriet Tubman Living Legends Award. Marquita, it's really great to see you.
Hi, Priscilla. How are you today? Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. Pretty much what I'm going to say is that the way we found out about what was going on in our neighborhood with XAI and Colossus is about, it was about people reporting what they saw and what they were hearing. And so the community began to experience the operating of XAI Colossus long before we knew as a community together that it was operating. It went on for about a year. And the fact that a nonprofit had to use resources to send drones to verify that methane gas turbines were in use is unacceptable and puts the burden on watching for polluters on the community, which is not how environmental justice principles are supposed to be when it comes to meaningful involvement. Again, my name is Marquita Bradshaw, Executive Director of Sowing Justice. We have been on the ground in coalition with other organizations in other capacities also fighting against data centers. My role as on the executive committee of the local Memphis NAACP as the environmental and justice chair was pivotal in getting with Mr. Moore, who is the president, the local president, was pivotal in getting the might of the NAACP involved and getting a lawsuit against XAI for their operations. So what was it that the community saw? And smelled? Well, the air was not the way it was supposed to be. It smelled bad. And also in certain communities that are in South Haven, it was noisy all the time, right? And even though there are standards around air pollution and workplace standards, there is not any standards about how community experience pollution every day. So what's acceptable use is usually based on what happens in the workplace and within a 24-hour within a 8 to 12 hour shift was acceptable exposure. So what does that mean for community members? That we have no, we don't have, there are not any acceptable levels of what's going on in our community because it's continuous within a 24 hours with it, which means that if it was a workplace standard, some of the machinery would have to be shut down. If it was a workplace standard experienced by workers. Why is that important? Because when you some people experience living in their home, working in their home 24 hours a day now. The workplace is not just actual at a building site. People work from home. Also, you have children and elderly who are at home more, and so that leaves them likely more to more exposures. Now, so what are we doing about it, right? We are looking for transparency and accountability with our elected leaders, and every time we are able to show up in whether it be county commissioner meeting or the city council meeting, we ask questions. Also, this is a great time of year, with it being election season, to ask your elected officials in public when about whether or not they support data centers and do they know the impact of data centers going to have on the community. And the more you make elected officials uncomfortable about not knowing or not sharing information, the more information they will share. And so it's upon us to do what we call bird dogging. And so have your list of questions that you want to know from your elected officials, and also showing up to the planning boards and uh, the commissions around utility usage and water boards. Those are the places where you could get the most information. Now, so where are we now? Colossus has pulled over $300 million worth of construction permits, right? And so that means that they plan on expanding way beyond the use of what they have now. And that means that we really have to get busy continuing our efforts to educate and inform the community. At Sowing Justice and Memphis APRI, who is a part of the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum, we have been doing canvassing as far as awareness campaigns and also having monthly meetings and and pretty much door knocking to activate leaders that are to get people interested and not only um, and educated about the routes of entry, informing about acute and chronic illnesses that happen from bad air quality, and also getting people to sign up for our indoor air monitoring program, which is a way for us to advocate in a place where people can learn more so about air quality program. They're pretty small and it's pretty much plug and play. And so people are learning a lot, not only about air quality outside, but also monitoring how the outside air is affecting their indoor air quality. And so we are in our second phase where we are getting daycare centers and classrooms this August to participate, and a new round of people to participate in different neighborhood expanding from our pilot, thanks to our our support from We Act. And if you have any questions about how we're implementing this or getting people involved, I welcome those. Right now, we know that people's lives are at stake. Um, when you go to these neighborhoods and that are closest by, they are experiencing a stench that you couldn't imagine, even if you after you leave the neighborhood, it's still in your nose. When you're in the neighborhoods, like in South Haven, where you hear the constant hum, when you leave the neighborhood, that noise is still in your ears. Even though you may leave to go to work or outside the neighborhood, that is the people are experiencing it differently in their bodies. And that is why it's so important for us to not only be on doors, we are also collecting stories, how people are experiencing this, and creating a campaign to get a moratorium on data centers based on the cumulative pollution that we already have and the harms and the health effects that they're causing now. Now, when in my introduction, it said that I first started work on a military landfill. Well, guess what? There are new generators uh, being, it's like GE generators that are being stored all over the depot right now. And we were, and that's just down the street from our office. And it's where a military landfill is. Because right now, data centers are looking at Superfund sites to actually uh, put data centers on, and which means that the community that we've been fighting for accountability and transparency around military pollution now has to fight a data center too. Um, so we are we are working. Today is our Clean Air Roundtable meeting, and I'm excited about that because some new people get to learn more about not only the seven qualities of air quality, but also exactly how these monitors work, and also tactics to make that they can utilize to monitor the indoor air quality and also make their homes healthier and safe. And now back to you.
Thank you,
I'll
Marquita.
just add one thing, which is that all of the advocacy that Marquita and Kermit and so many others have done on the ground in Memphis is finally, getting some response from the local elected officials. Marquita mentioned a campaign to get a moratorium, and I think in the last city council and county commission meetings, there was actually conversation around doing some sort of local legislation to address data centers. So TBD on what that will actually look like, but it's certainly a step in the right direction from, unfortunately, 2 years too late for XAI, but it's encouraging to see the local elected leaders recognize that there needs to be a better balance between welcoming data centers and protecting the community.
That's really exciting, yeah, to see that work paying off. Thank you so much, Marquita. I am going to read some questions from the chat for you all to answer. This first one, I think, is directed towards you, Amanda. It says, our town, Wiscasset, Maine, signed an NDA last August, and the documents they submitted to a FOAA request, Maine's FOIA, had the name of the data center company or developer redacted. Is this legal/correct, or should the name of the company be public?
That's a great question. And part of it is going to really depend on your state law and what the exemptions are under your state law. So when you get that FOIA response or public records response in whatever state you are, usually there's a requirement for them to provide the basis of why they're redacting that information. And so then you have to go look at what the exemption is that they're citing, like why they're saying that's not public information, and evaluate whether you think it's justified or not. And you can push back. Usually there's some sort of administrative appeal or an opportunity to litigate. Obviously, in order to litigate, you would have to consult with an attorney and figure out if there's a way. But you can also push back informally, like Marquita was mentioning earlier. I mean, you can take that piece of paper with the redacted name and show up at your next city council meeting, or whoever is most involved in the project, and hold it up and say, like, why can't we know who this company is? I mean, there's a fair amount of community activism and holding government leaders accountable that can come out of this. So I can't really weigh in on whether that particular redaction was legal under Maine law, but we are seeing, as I sort of alluded to earlier, there's just been a lot of assertion of economic development or trade secret about things that don't seem like they should be claimed as trade secret or necessary to protect confidentiality in an economic development process. So I hear and understand the frustration, and I think, like, there are multiple avenues to pressure disclosure, one of them just being making public that they're not making it public, right? And making sure that elected leaders know that other people in your community know that.
Thank you. Our next question says, would we be able to leverage workplace health standards in legal pursuits against data centers as more people are working and learning from home?
I am
I
not,
think,
oh, sorry, Marquita.
okay, go ahead. You go ahead. I go after you.
Okay. Oh, I was going to say, I'm not in a lawyer who works on OSHA issues, but I suspect, but don't, well, I don't know the answer to that question, but I suspect there are definitions of a workplace that you would need to look at that would help to answer that question. I haven't heard of that theory being used, but again, I'm not a OSHA expert, so I don't know.
Yes, I don't with what a workplace is being redefined from work from home, we still have not explored that as a strategy yet. Um, but the workplace standards are wouldn't fit community standards, right? Because of the community exposure is 24/7. There may be ways to look at policy around utilizing workplace standards as a way to actually for like noise pollution, right? That the workplace standards might be 80 decibels for so many hours, but in the community, it may be 50 or 60 decibels or whatever like that. But you could utilize the workplace standard to actually have a time where those go off, like a quiet time between. I've seen some communities try to implement a quiet time between us, like from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. And so, to answer your question, I don't know, but this is how some workplace standards have been used to get quiet times where there's noise pollution.
Thank you so much. This next question, I saw, Marquita, you answered a little bit in the chat. I would love it if you would elaborate a little bit more on what organizing strategy has been the most effective in getting busy slash previously not engaged folks to take part in community action.
Okay, so first of all, you can't wait for the community to come you. You have to go where they are. So that means crowd canvassing at grocery stores, events, community events. We kicked off our canvassing at Juneteenth events, and that was really, really a great way for people to get an introductory into the work that we were doing and also around how data centers. People are really concerned and they want to talk about it. And as a result, our monthly meeting has went from like 10 to 12 to like 40 people are RSVP for today. Um, it can when when you meet people where they are, or talk about, you know, ask them about like what are their concerns about the environment, what are their concerns about how the environment affects their health and also their budget, right? Those high utility bills, they get people in the door. If a person has COPD or asthma or their children in the house or elderly in the house, they are concerned about their family's health. That gets people in the door. And so what we do is make it personable, and also we're collecting those stories about how um, some community members have experienced pollution and how it's affected their family from the depot, and now experiencing uh, the 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 XAI and what it means to them to have a space to come talk about a plan of action. And so, really, the the old school model of relational organizing and going to people where they are, whether it be at their doors, at the grocery store, at a fair, a Juneteenth festival, quinceañera, birthday parties, family reunions. Yeah, we go to just about everywhere, even some workout classes where in the community where they do the line dancing is a place that the team is going to canvas this week, because it's almost like 75 people that come to like those classes 3 times a week in local community centers. And so this is a way we don't wait for people to come to us. We go to the people.
Awesome, thank you. This next, well, not really question, but more so request says, I would appreciate any model legislation or sample legislation you can share. Amanda or Marquita, do you have anything, any resources similar to that you'd be open to sharing?
We don't have model, it depends on what state you're in, but for local ordinances, it's really going to vary depending on your state law and then your local law. And so what we have are examples of ordinances that have been adopted by other communities. So we have some ordinances from Virginia that moved to this special use permitting model that I mentioned. The city of Birmingham recently adopted a fairly robust data center ordinance. I mentioned Nashville is getting ready to adopt one in a couple of weeks. So we have those types of examples of things that communities are doing, but at this time we don't have like model ordinances. And really, I do want to mention just that our theory of change and one of the guiding principles of our data center work is community self-determination. And communities are going to have different perspectives on whether and on what terms they want to allow data centers into the community. So lots of communities are adopting moratoria and just pressing pause and saying, whoa, we need to slow down. We need to think about this some more and consider common sense protections. Other communities are jumping very quickly to having some sort of affirmative guardrails in place, which is pretty much what happened in Birmingham, and it seems to be on track to happen in Nashville, where there might be like a very short moratorium, but really they want to get guardrails in place, but they're not just totally opposed to data centers. They just want to make sure they're trying to address as many of the impacts as possible. And that's, if that's the way that the community decides they want to handle it, that makes sense, as long as there's a lot of opportunity for input and responsiveness on the part of local elected officials in terms of like the community's values for protecting clean air, protecting water resources, whatever the community kind of holds most close. But there are these examples, but they do have to be tweaked, for your particular your particular jurisdiction.
Do you have like a database or spreadsheet or something of the sort that would maybe have a list of those types of ordinances that we could point people towards?
I don't think we have one posted, but I can follow up and just provide some links to some examples. And again, I would encourage folks, your community, different communities have different priorities in terms of what they're trying to address. So just make sure you're tailoring it to your particular community's goals and the vision for how you want to relate to a data center in your community. If you want to relate to a data center in your community, which is another question.
Thank you so much. I think this will be our last question. And this person asks, what assistance do you need from environmental professionals? I'm an OSHA industrial hygienist and an environmental engineer. I'd love to hear from the both of you on this one. Where do you think that this type of role could come into play on this issue?
Of course, you have experience and knowledge um, that most community members don't have, right? Especially around um, workplace standards. And I know that your rules are around workplace standards, but if you would like weigh in with community about educating uh, us about like what could happen even at low levels if these continue to happen within a person's lifetime when it comes to acute and chronic exposures. A lot of the standards, there is not any community exposure standards. And so um, working on cumulative exposure and working to protect communities from continuous exposure with your expertise is something that I would ask for you to do, and helping shape the future of decreasing the harm of cumulative pollution in communities.
And I would just add, I think, depending on what your area of expertise is, I think there's a lot of need for both like looking at specific data center proposals and being able to evaluate the types of impacts, like from a project specific proposal. So if they're using this type of equipment, it's going to likely cause this amount of noise, that kind of expertise. And then also on the solution side. So what are the solutions that are out there from a technical standpoint that data centers could be putting in place to address some of the impacts like noise pollution, obviously air pollution. So are there other ways that they could be solving some of the issues? Because I think Marquita made the great point earlier that a lot of what we're experiencing right now, excuse the siren, is the burden being put on communities rather than on these super wealthy companies that have a lot of technical expertise and should be taking the lead on solving these concerns, um, and contributing to a positive vision of the future, both for the technological goals, but also for the experience of communities on the ground. And right now we're not seeing that happen. And so we have to kind of put forward ideas of solutions that that they will have to respond to. But I think, unfortunately, right now that is the situation we're in, even though really part of what we're talking about here with putting better guardrails in place or having some additional zoning and transparency requirements is to force that conversation to happen earlier in the process so that we don't get into situations where we're having to monitor pollution after the fact, the way that we are in many cases right now.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Marquita. How can people get in contact with you if they have any follow-up questions?
They can go to sowingjustice.org and submit, through our website, or go to info@sowingjustice.org to request more information, especially about organizing. I tried to condense what we were doing within a couple of seconds. And so some of the relational organizing tactics that we're using.
And my email address is agarcia@selc.org.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I think that will conclude our very first advocacy series webinar. So thank you again. Thank you all for attending. And this session was recorded, so we will send out the recording shortly. So if you want to rewatch it, or if anyone you know missed it, they can go ahead and take a look. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.